Thank you. Thank you all for coming. Give yourselves a big round of applause for coming out. I'm Jason Stewart. I'm the national co-chair of the Screen Actors Guild AFTRA LGBT Committee, which I started 13 years ago. I'm a volunteer, so I want to thank you. I want to say thank you to all the people at SAG, the diversity people who put this together, SAG-AFTRA and everybody here at Outfest. Give them a big round of applause for putting this together, because they really did all the heavy lifting. 13 years ago, I met a lot of actors here at Outfest, and they didn't have a place to be supported. They didn't have a place to feel like they were connected to our community. And I decided to call my union, SAG-AFTRA, and see if we could set this up. And I called, and I couldn't get anywhere. So finally, I kept calling and calling, sending emails and faxes. And this guy named Duncan Crabtree Ireland, who was the head legal counsel, called me back. And he said, I'm in the room with Alan Rosenberg, an actor, Anne-Marie Johnson, an actress, Sumi Haru, who's a host, a Jewish man, a black woman, an Asian woman, and a father of a trans daughter. Those 4 people understood our journey and said, yes, we can have a committee. And I thank them. We've had tons of panels over the years, mostly with gay and lesbian actors, and of late, we've done a lot of things with trans people, a lot of panels right here at Outfest. So this year, it's time to talk about the B in LGBT. I think it's time. Ellen Hang, from the head of diversity, I'm not sure of her exact title because I don't remember, I'm too self-involved. And I have been talking for years about this, and she really it was the spearhead in all of this, and decided that, hey, it's time to do this, and I totally agreed. It's been long overdue, so we got to work. She basically got to work, and we found out some information and did some research that 52% of LGBT people in the community are bisexual, 52%. 58 of bisexuals are exposed to bi and biphobic jokes in the workplace. And 31% have been sexually harassed on the job because of who they are. That was more than enough for me to say, hey, we got to do something. So I'm thrilled and excited to start the conversation. I want to just say just one thing about a couple of the groups here that have been a support to us here in putting this panel together. The Los Angeles Bi Trans Force, thank you for being here. The AM Bi. Still Bisexual, Bisexual Representatives Award, and the American Institute of Bisexuality. And just on a personal note, I'm just really humbled always that everybody shows up and becomes a part of this and really says, hey, I'm willing to listen and learn something new. I love that. And I love the idea that all the people here have come to show up as these panelists, and it's wonderful. Our host is going to be Eliel Cruz, who is I have his pronunciation right here in really big letters. For an old man, that's very nice. Thank you, Ellen. Eliel Cruz, he is the Director of Communications for the New York City Anti-Violence Project. He's an organizationer, and he's dedicated to ending all forms of violence against LGBTQ people and HIV-affected communities. Cruz is an activist, a speaker, and a writer on LGBT issues and culture. He has spoken across the country on these issues pertaining to the bisexual community, media representation, as well as faith and sexuality at universities and conferences alike. He has written for the Huffington Post, NBC, Teen Vogue, Washington Post, Details, the New York Times, and many others. He's going to host the panel. Please go ahead. Thank you so much.
So I want to really set the conversation over starting with Megan's expertise. I joke that I feel like what you do for work is you get paid to watch TV and film. I know you do more than that, and yet she is one of the lead in the entertainment section of GLAAD that I believe you started the reports. So I want you to talk a little bit about what has it been the last 6 years, I believe, that you've been working at GLAAD, and I don't know how many years you've been doing the reports. In the stats that you've seen in terms of bisexual representation, any trends you may have seen, and maybe even speak a little bit of the importance of representation in general.
Yeah, so I've been at GLAAD for 6.5 years, and our TV tracking and reporting really goes back to 1996, which is the year before Ellen came out. So it was a very, very short report. It was pretty much nothing, but we wanted to put it out and get people, thinking about why don't we have any LGBTQ characters anywhere. So the television report, it's called Where We Are on TV. It comes out every fall. Kind of goes back, for a while of GLAAD's history. We were, founded in the 80s as kind of a watchdog group that was founded to call out, poor media coverage of gay men during kind of the height of the HIV and AIDS epidemic, particularly by the New York Post. So our, roots are very much in media advocacy work and using, the power of journalism and the press and film and TV and comics and gaming and everything that we do now to tell our stories and to humanize us to people who may not have known us. And then we, in 2013, put out our first Studio Responsibility Index, which is our annual film report that we do. We just put out one in May, and that is one that I co-created. And then with that report, we also created the Vita Russo test, which is our kind of analysis that we put all of our films up against. And it's again, I stress this to people all the time, it's a very minimum standard in the way that the Bechdel test is, and it is very, very depressing how few films pass. So, our last report just came out. We had 109 films from the 7 major studios last year. That's 88% of the US box office is the things that they put out. And it was a record low in terms of how many films included us. It was 14 out of 109, which is 12.8%. And then if you really dig down deep into that, half of those films had less than 5 minutes of screen time for us. So if there was a queer character there at all, we were very minimal. It would be like one scene or it would be a punchline. And there was actually no trans characters in any major release last year.
Scarlett Johansson had a quiet year.
But then, in the history of that report, I think we've only had 5 trans
It's been
characters.
5 minutes, Jen.
Fair. And
I think it's too late.
yeah. And when we have had trans characters in film, there's been, I think, 5 in the years that we've done that report. We've done 6 editions now in major releases, and every single one of them has been there as a punchline. So there's a long way to go in film. Television is a bit of a different story. We have a lot more characters going on there. So our TV report looks at broadcast and cable and streaming. It's a lot for a 2-person team to do. But bi representation has actually been up, pretty much every year the past few years, which is good. We're super happy to see that. Out of, I think it was 390 something LGBTQ characters that we had across all those platforms at the beginning of this past fall season, 93 of them, or 28%, were bi. So that's still not where we need to be. Like you said, 52% of the community, we were 28%. But it still skews heavily women. It was 75 women and 18 men. And actually, we have seen a drop in bisexual men every year for the past 3 years. So we went from 23, which was already low, down to 19, down to 18. So that's something that we really are kind of focused on, especially because we know that within the next year, we're losing a few shows that have great bi men, like Crazy Ex-Girlfriend and Shadowhunters are both ending next year. But we have Him or Her coming, which I'm very excited about. So, that's really kind of where the stats are in terms of all of that. But, we also kind of dig into the stories that we see from those characters, because it's not just, a numbers game. And with that, things have gotten, like you said, things have gotten better. We're starting to get a lot more. We're starting to get a lot more kind of nuanced stories. But in recent years, there's still some tropes that we've seen that we're kind of tired of seeing, which kind of the top 2 are really, bi characters who are only ever portrayed as kind of using their sexuality or sex as like a bargaining tool, or to get something, and that's the only time you ever see them with a romantic interest, is kind of in terms of transactions. And then that feeds into kind of the larger one, which is this issue of we still see so many bi characters who are portrayed as kind of having inherently just like no morals, and they're just manipulative, and that really kind of gets back to why representation matters, because that kind of so entertainment has kind of like a reciprocal relationship with society, right? Everything that comes out both like reflects our values, but it also shapes our values as we watch things, and we get to learn more about people who, you know, maybe have a different experience to us, or people that we don't know. So when they tell our stories, you know, poorly, that has a real effect on our lived experiences, and you know, that is partly why there's, you know, the majority of the community is bi people, but we are less likely to be out at work than gay and lesbian people. And it goes back to this kind of like undermining of our identity that people get from the shows and the movies and, you know, the music and everything that they're seeing presented to them as this is what bisexuality is, this is what a bisexual person is like. And so that is, you know, why we do this work that we do, and then we do these kind of big extensive reports, and then we're able to use those to kind of set our priorities and go in and talk to networks and studios on how to do better, and talk about maybe voices that they're missing, and, you know, work with them on that level to make sure that we are starting to get to more of where we need to be.
And that's a much more in-depth version of you get paid to watch TV and film, which
Yes, yes.
I'm so appreciative. I'm so appreciative of the work that GLAAD is doing, and in both being able to watch these reports and statistics and seeing the importance of authentic representation. All of you on this panel are out in public and you're in about your bisexuality. I want to ask, and because this can be popcorn style, when did you come to terms? How did you find out about your sexuality? When did you come to terms with it? And what is pushing you to be as public in this industry about it as you are?
Anybody?
You better jump on it. Go ahead.
I'll go first. I mean, for me, I figured out who I was in college. I think was like I knew in high school that there was something, but it wasn't until in college where I was actually to figure out words for it and like understand that there was something beyond just gay or lesbian and that kind of thing. Because like I grew up in Compton, and this is not a place where you talk about those kind of things very regularly. So it was a lot of self-learning, a lot of like self-exploration. What was the second part of your question?
Well, I mean, I'm curious as to why you're so public about it in this industry right
yes.
now.
I mean, I grew up in Compton in the 90s, late 80s and 90s, and it was like at the time the most dangerous place in America for like 10 years of my childhood. And growing up in a place like that and getting out, you start to feel a need to live because you've made it. And so when I was growing up and figuring out what I wanted to do, the last thing I wanted to do was like not be who I was. And so even just thinking about what that felt like for the brief period of time where I was figuring it out and I wasn't telling anybody, it was like, I can't imagine going back to that or doing anything and not doing it in my fullness of who I am. And so once I realized who I was, I felt like I didn't see anybody who looked like me. I didn't see anybody who represented what I felt like. And I knew I couldn't be the only one. Like, there's no way I'm the only person. So there must be a reason no one's standing up. So I'm going to be the first one to be like, hey, guys, over here, am I the only, like, you know what I mean? Like, so I felt just compelled to be myself.
My ex-husband is the one who helped me come out of the closet. Actually, he was incredibly supportive, and I was very clueless. I think I had probably pushed it down even if it was there before. I really wasn't aware I was attracted to women when I was younger, and I think some experiences I'd had when I was a much younger child made me like feel guilt or shame about even the idea, so it didn't even enter my mind until he started saying, I think that you might be attracted to women. I don't like, you might want to look at it from, it's gonna sound terrible, but like he liked to watch porn. So like he was like, I think that you're interested in some of the women and you're not acknowledging that to yourself. And I was like, I don't.
Was he just watching your eyes or something?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, seriously. He was, and I was like, I don't know. But the more that he kind of told me, this is the truth, the more that he kept saying, like, it's nothing to be ashamed of. You're okay. It's okay that that's who you are. I think that you need to be a fully expressed person, and you can't be a fully expressed person without being a fully expressed sexual being. And I don't want you to close off a part of yourself. And I don't have to be involved, and I don't have to, like, if you ever want to explore it, that's completely fine. And so I started considering and looking, and over time I realized that I was attracted to women. Our marriage was poly, and when we split, I was like, am I actually bi, or am I more, because I tended to lean more towards women, and over time I realized I actually was bi, but that people kept trying to tell me I was a lesbian, and that I wasn't attracted to men. I was like, no, but that's not true. And I realized that I got a lot of like bi shame and biphobia coming at me from both sides of the community often. And when I finally got to the place of acknowledging to myself, like, no, I really am I'm bi. I'm not a lesbian, even though I'm dating more women now that I've gotten divorced. I'm still who I am intrinsically. And no matter what the gender of the person I'm dating, that doesn't change who I am. And it shapes how I see the world and how I interact with the world. And we had decided during our marriage that we were going to be open, and I decided for myself that because so many people I was experiencing all of that phobia, I felt like that I was already out and open. I did not want to go, one, back into the closet, and two, that there needed to be a voice. And when Prop 8 happened, I was like, I decided to get actively involved in activism, and I realized in almost all the spaces, again, everybody was assuming that I was a lesbian, and there were no other bi people that felt comfortable speaking up, and they closeted themselves often, and I wanted to be a voice that made people feel safe to come out.
Jen, Zelda?
Sure. I was always someone that I think from many different angles and for many different reasons was pushed similarly to be told what she was and what she wanted. It even still happens. It happened last week. I was out with a bunch of my friends, and they're all lesbians at that group that I was with, and they said, you just haven't met the right woman yet. And there's still that conversation. I think from the age of 12, my voice dropped, and they just assumed, and I didn't like other people getting to speak for me. I think probably came from my parents very much, but I like speaking for myself. So when social media became what it is now, I didn't see anyone else that was doing the same, so I decided to. And it's interesting to now see so many other people starting to do that, because I do think it helps people. I genuinely do, especially because as someone who has always been quite fluid in how she presents as well, like there are times I'll shave my head and I completely change my fashion, and I am a person who, as my feelings go, I present differently, and it will come up again, and people will push and say, oh, you're a lesbian, or oh, you're straight, you're just putting on a show, and it's not. People, at least for me, I was always this incredibly kind of tumultuous creature that sought out what I wanted to find in myself and in other people. And I wanted to say to as many people as I could, that's completely and utterly fine, but don't tell me what I am.
I like that. It's like an act of resistance. I just, the idea of limiting yourself to half the population when there are so many beautiful people, it really strikes me as absurd. Like, I'm just going to immediately rule out 2/3 of this panel? Like, why would I do that? It just never made sense to me. I just always liked boys and girls. Like, they're just people. They're all great people. They're all different. I mean, 2 women are just as different as any given man and woman, or 2 men. Like, I don't understand just only liking one thing. I respect it. That's your choice. Like, it's fine. You're born that way or whatever. Like, I just don't understand it. I can't understand that attitude.
Well, I'm curious, Jen, because I know that you've spoken publicly a little bit more about sometimes you're, in the last few years, speaking more about publicly about your bisexuality. In some ways, you've told me privately as well, and I've seen you on Twitter saying that your transness has almost superseded your bisexuality for a lot of years for the reason. Do you want to speak about, what was the processing you speaking about that publicly more?
I think my trans identity just kind of eclipsed everything else, because it's what leads, it's what comes into the room before me, and so there's really no room for discussion about bisexuality. It's a non-issue compared to, am I even going to be allowed to be in here at all, much less as myself? So it was very much secondary. And then as things have gotten better and I've kind of settled in, it was like, once I figured out who I was, it was because I was bisexual as a boy too. I'd always been that way, and it's like once I went through transition, settled into my woman, and it's like, oh shit, I still am. Like, that didn't change. That didn't change at all. And I joke about this, but it's true. It's like I've been every letter. I've been gay, I've been lesbian, I've been bi, I'm trans, I'm queer. I've dated gay men, straight men, lesbians, straight women, non-binary people, trans men and women, and they're all wonderful. It's like flavors of ice cream. I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about like the bad, greedy bisexual trope, but I mean, there's a little bit of that in me.
Who wants cake you can't eat?
But I will also say part of the reason I actually started talking about it openly, I think in part because there was a little bit of just kind of cis-normativity at work earlier in my transition where it's easier to be affirmed as a trans woman if I'm dating men. So there was that kind of like, it just affirmed my womanhood in a way that was important. But really in the last couple of years, it's been as the reports started coming out that actually proved something that a lot of us had a sense of but didn't have the data for, which is that bisexual people face a kind of unique set of systemic oppressions, both from outside and from within the LGBTQ community. They often feel that they're not at home in any particular place, and when the reports started coming out to show that they really had more depression and more suicidal ideation and more unemployment, all these things, I started to realize like this is a real issue. And I know from my work in the trans community that it's largely due to representation. If you feel like you're the only one out there, if you feel like you can't speak up, I was just at a camp for queer women, and at our table, I was with a friend who I know is married to a man, but she's still bi and still queer, and she wanted to be there. And she was afraid to ever mention her husband, because she thought she'd get in trouble if she said that. But, some other people around us heard us, and like they all said the same thing, that they're all actually bi, but it's just kind of a community identity. And I've also seen gay men break down into tears when they like admit that they actually do like women and that they felt like they had to cut off that part of their life once they entered into gay community. So it was with those realizations that I realized I had a responsibility to be out and open about it. And it also lets more people know I'm available. So just to bring it full circle back to that. RJ and I make a very cute couple. I don't know if you've seen photos, but.
I love what you. I love what you're saying. I think people are touching this a little bit, but I also want to make, I think, an important note on language, both with these studies and both with bisexuality, that we recognize bisexuality, and something that bisexual activists have been using more is bi+ to include individuals who identify with various labels, who are both romantically and or sexually attracted to multiple genders. So individuals who identify as bisexual, pansexual, omni, fluid, XYZ, the community as a whole are represented in those various disparities. I really love that a lot of you have touched on in being able to speak your truth, you're creating space for other people to be able to speak their own truths. And so I think that also ties back to why representation is incredibly important when you're able to see yourself on screen, that kind of impact it has. I'm curious if you have seen yourself on screen, when was that and what was that experience like?
I've never seen myself on screen.
I'll second that.
And that was part of the driving force behind wanting to do my show, which is like, I watch TV all the time. I work in TV, I write TV, and never seen anything remotely close. So, I mean, I feel like for a lot of us, if you're a white, straight person, for decades, TV has been a mirror, and for the rest of us, it's been a window where we're watching other people be represented and watching their experiences be shown back to them, and we don't get that same experience of fulfillment. We don't get the treatment of how TV moves society along and how TV opens people's worlds to things and experiences and people they don't know in a different part of the world. And for so long, we've been left out of that. And so I think for me personally, my show was a direct challenge to that, to like start pushing back against that, because it's crazy that I can walk into a room of executives and say, here's a show, here's an idea, here's a character that's never existed on TV before in 2018.
I'm curious about the process of you pitching a show about a Black bisexual man, knowing that the majority of the industry, obviously, as you just said, was a mirror. Was there any difficulties or any kind of things that you had to navigate that was different in other types of things that you worked on?
weirdly, it wasn't hard. I mean, I pitched to I met with Issa first and Issa Rae, and we talked about the idea, and we both loved it. And then we had a meeting with HBO, and I literally said the same thing to them. I was like, this is a show about a character that's never existed on TV before. And then I took like 15 minutes and explained the show, and 3 days later they bought it.
Nice.
And I mean, I think a big part of that is trying to, especially now that TV is so much more competitive, that there's a lot of the same out there. And so if you have a chance to get something new and different, I think everyone's trying to jump on it. So I'll get in the door any way I can.
Yeah, but that's also having the courage to step out, because most of the black men that I know that are bisexual, even if they identify as bi, and they're in the industry, are not willing to be out because they
Right.
get so much backlash from the black community.
Right.
They feel like they're never going to get any straight roles ever again. They're going to be assumed to be gay and then get all of the kind of
Right.
homophobic. Like, there's a lot of internalized homophobia.
Oh, totally. And that stuff, even knowing all of that, for some reason, I mean, the things I've been through in my life, that never stopped me. And I knew it would be a barrier. I've gotten it, and it's still like, I don't give a shit. It's just like, this has to be done. And I know that there are men suffering and and I know some men who publicly only date women, but I know they sleep with men, and they would love the freedom to be who they actually are, but they're afraid. And so I feel like if you can't do it, and if there's thousands or millions of other men who feel the same way, then if I have to be the person to like kick open that door, then fuck it. I wear a size 16, so I'll kick the door down.
You're real tall. You're real tall. You all right. I remember like Lynn and Girlfriends, but it's like the blip of the storyline of her being with a woman and being it was like so, I feel like it was so small. I was so and I was so hungry for it. I was like incredibly excited when it happened, but then it was like over, and there was no like kind of follow through with the story, which made me sad, you know. And I remember like really yearning for it when I first came out of the closet, and my best friend at the time, we both came out around the same time, and she identifies as lesbian, I identify as bi, but one of our friends who had been out for a while like got us all these movies to watch, all these lesbian movies, like to indoctrinate us.
Education.
Right,
yeah.
education, right? And so like we're
The
watching.
starter kit.
Right, except for everybody like jumped off a flipping building at the end, all of them, or they were sad or depressed or horrible. And I was like, dear God, and they were all white. And I was like, why are they so depressed? And where is our Love Jones? Like, where is our Love Jones? And it's like, there isn't one, and there still isn't one. That's the thing, there still isn't one, which I think is terrible. Like, there aren't a lot of black lesbian storylines, let alone black bisexual storylines. And we as black women, the whole Jezebel eroticism thing of considering us promiscuous, like there's certain archetypes that as black women we fit into as well. And if you also add in the bi moniker, then you've added on top of that Jezebel promiscuous idea, we're too greedy, like all these things that nobody really wants to deal with, and most people don't tell that story.
Yeah, I think black and trans women have that particular aspect in common, in that we're overly sexualized for most people. And so if we bring any sexuality to something, we don't want to conflate it with like the worst tropes.
And then it also opens the door sometimes. Like I've had people that when they found out I was bi, like they either knew I was married or knew I was with and all of a sudden they felt like they had permission to be more openly hit on me or to push harder with getting together with me. Like, and I'm like, yo, I already said like I'm not interested, not because I can't, but because I don't want you. Yeah. You know what I mean? But like it's like an automatic assumption.
So you
I'm sure we've all been invited to many bedrooms of married couples the moment that they find out we're bisexual.
The unicorn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, Zelda, you said you haven't seen it represented, but you're also taking it into your own hands in a lot of just like Trayvon as well.
Yeah, but in different ways as well, where it's like I grew up in this industry. I'd seen it since I was a baby, and I used to steal my dad's scripts all the time because it's a lot easier for kids to read scripts than most books. They're not usually rocket science. 90% of them don't tend to be great, but I still remember reading them, and then the way women were described, it always led with physical description, and that was always so confusing to me, because I went, well, why? You don't know who's going to walk through the door yet. And the first movie I ever related to had nothing to do with her sexuality at all, but my favorite movie is Alien. So Ripley was the first woman that, when I was growing up, I was on movie sets all the time, and I remember going, not a single woman here reminds me of me. And then I saw Alien, and I was like, oh shit, there's room. And then when I found out that Alien was actually written with all male pronouns, but prefaced with saying not a single one of these characters couldn't be played by any nationality or any sex. And I remember seeking out that script. It took forever to find it, but I was like, I needed to see that for myself. That was a thing that was my favorite movie, and I thought it was so courageous what Ripley represented for me. And then to find out that that was also part of what they'd written into this was, no, I want the best person for this part. And it had nothing to do with the gender, and Sigourney Weaver being just this powerhouse who came in and was like, yeah, this part was written with male pronouns, it's mine, I want it. And that changed my entire perspective. And I had one of my mentors, who is an incredible man, told me about 2 years ago now, I'd hit this really low point because I kept being told, like, I'd go in for the lead part, and they go, well, we have a lesbian best friend. And it had hit me so many times, and I would still happily go in for that part because I just wanted to work. I loved my job. But even then, it was just, I didn't fit in any particular box. And he said, well, I've been doing this for 45 years, and 98% of scripts are written and directed by white men. And I can guarantee you, because I haven't, not a single one of them was going to imagine you. You sound 40, and you look 17. And so if there's a script that you have always wanted to have in your hand and you never had, why don't you make it? And it changed my entire world. And from that point forward, like, I'm making my first feature next year. I made my first pilot this year, and I don't write physical descriptions in any of my scripts, because why would I? I don't know who's going to be right for it coming in. Why do I need to limit what they think they should look like? And I can't tell you how many people will read them and they didn't notice. They just imagine themselves. And, well, because actors. And the first feature that I'm making, I'm the lead in, and it's going to be very interesting, because I remember how many rooms they said, that's impossible. I went, why? They go, well, I can't think of any examples. I went, you can't think of any female examples off the top of your head. I can, but I can tell you all the male ones that you're forgetting, and you loud them and give them work all the time. And one of my mentors is Taika Waititi, and when the people gave me pushback, he said, abso-fucking-lutely not. That's your script, you wrote it for yourself. If you don't do it now, they'll never let you down the road. And I'm basically female Hannibal Lecter in it, so I don't know anyone else that wanted that as badly as I did, where I was like, yeah, that's the script that I was like, if this is never passed in front of my hands. And I went, I'm really tired of every serial killer or killer that they make of women had to be destroyed by a man in order to be the killer that she was. I went, why can't we just be born happily psychotic? So you'll get to see that at some point.
Jen, do you want to speak? Have you seen yourself on the screen in any kind of way?
Nothing
But
springs to mind.
and you also like have like just like Trayvon, I think, and I've seen Zelda as well. You created your character in her story. I mean, nominated as Leela likes to continue to remind us. Was also bisexual. It was bisexual too. Was that intentional?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, it's just the whole notion of bringing yourself to the part. For those of you who don't know, I wrote a web series called Her Story, which is about the lives of two trans women in LA. It did very well.
It's very good.
And yeah, my character, because of the plot line that my character is in an abusive relationship with a man and leaves him for a woman, I think a lot of people, particularly in queer community, thought, oh, she's coming out as lesbian. But in my mind, it was always, it's about that's a bad partner and this is a good partner, not that I'm leaving a man for a woman. I'm leaving an abusive dick for a really nice person. That's what it's about. So, and again, that is rendered invisible often by the kinds of assumptions that people are bringing based on their own identity and sexuality. But yeah, it's pretty explicit. She mentions earlier that prior to transition, she dated both men and women. So.
What I think is interesting about representation, generally speaking, which Megan mentioned a little bit, is that a lot of bisexual representation feeds into tropes. I think that storyline specifically, right, is reflective of a lot of the unfortunate statistics we have around bisexual women being at the highest rates of intimate partner violence, sexual violence, and domestic violence, of even more than lesbian and straight women. That authentic storytelling then feeds into this kind of education of our experience. But when we do tropes, it ends up bisexuals end up being the butt of the jokes a lot of times. Trayvon, I'm curious, with your show being a comedy, how do you navigate that in terms of being able to joke about bisexuality in a way that doesn't contribute to, or how will you at least, and that won't contribute to these kind of harmful tropes?
I mean, I've seen bisexual people made fun of in a lot of like really modern comedies. Like one of the worst examples is Sex and the City. You've probably seen this episode of Sex and the City. And like those kind of things have been setting the tone for who we are to the world. And I think it kind of bled into like 30 Rock and New Girl and all these other shows doing the same thing, where there's no one in these writers' rooms going, this is not like funny, or like this is not how people should be portrayed. But I mean, with my show, the comedy is not about the sexuality in that way. The comedy comes from life. Like there's no joke in my show where the butt of that joke is his sexuality. It's like his friends around him are very aware of it and they support him through it. It's jokes that like both affirm his identity but are also still like funny, and like how friends like poke fun at each other. And so the thing I tried to do was make a show where people could see like you're not just your sexuality, like you're just a person. I get up, I go to work, I go home, I go to the gym, I do all the things that everybody else does, and my sexuality plays very little role in that. And so it was a way for me to start to show people there's more to us than what you've been told for the last 20 years or what people think about us, and that you can love a man and love a woman, and you can move between those spaces and it not matter to anybody around you. It's kind of almost trying to normalize it or over-normalize it a little bit just so people can like get caught up in the way like Will and Grace brought people along with gay people, because even though it was like over the top and silly, it was still like people were seeing gay people on TV be people, and it moved the needle on people like acceptance of gay people in society. And so I just started from that place of like, where do I want people to see, how do I want people to see us? And like when I get questions like from women like, oh, I'm afraid you might leave me for a man, and I always say, and if I did, who gives a fuck? Like it's not like why, yeah, like why is the gender of the person?
Why do you care who I leave you for?
I left you. That's the problem. Like that's what you should be but there's this shame in the idea that you were left for someone of the opposite sex.
Like, I would think it would hurt either way. Like, I'm blessed I'm married to my darling wife who didn't give a shit that I was bi. Thank you. And actually likes and supports bi women, but I got so many people over the years that was like their fear, and they were like, well, I could deal if you left me for a woman, but not if you left me for a man. And it's like,
I get
why?
that.
I'm still
Actually, I
gone.
get that though. I get that. I mean, I remember it most particularly with a woman I dated prior to transition who articulated that fear, and I think it's rooted in just anxiety that your partner might want something that you are incapable of providing.
Oh no, I totally get that.
But
Yeah,
I think the other side of that is that then, okay, but then you're incapable of providing, but then it's like, then mine wasn't good enough that I provided, because you then went to somebody who's like me. You know what I'm saying? Like, either way, not so great.
Yeah, I mean, there's a built-in loss that's happening, that when you're going through a breakup or you're being hurt, you're looking for any attack on what could be the reason for what's happening to you. But I think the idea that a bi person would leave you for someone of the opposite sex because of something you can't provide is also a misconception about us. Because like, if I'm dating a woman, I'm not dating you because you're not a man. I'm dating you because I like you as a person. And if I'm dating a man, it's not because you're not a woman. It's because I like who you are as a person. So I'm not like looking to you to give me something a woman can't, or vice versa. I'm just trying to like find love like everybody else.
Right.
And that's kind of like what I'm trying to do with my show, which is like, it's not about like, I think there's a line in the script that's that says something like I don't care what's between your legs or something like that, or like, bi people have either orgasms because we're okay with like like some stupid joke like that, like basically putting to bed the idea of like, one person can give me something, someone else, and I'm always looking for one or the other, and it's not, it's about the person.
I think like the joke thing too is an important thing to kind of go back to, and you know, I think like Brooklyn Nine-Nine does this so great with like Captain Holt and now with Rosa, but like, you know, they make jokes about like him being gay or her being bi or whatever, but like the punchline is never just, oh, he's gay, because that's just not a good joke.
Right.
But like, you know, it'll be like the joke about him saying like, oh, we didn't know how long marriage equality was gonna last, so like we went and got married, and then they flash to like, you know, he cuts the guy off before he can give the whole thing just so they can say I do and be done with it. And so it's like that kind of joke, but it
Right.
also goes back to like who's in the room and who has that like that knowledge to make it. Because if
Right.
you're not in the room, then there's always gonna be that sense of like otherness that the writer puts on. This is what we think,
Right.
kind of thing.
And we should shout out Stephanie for
Yes.
being so open about her own bisexuality that she was able to encourage the writers on Brooklyn Nine-Nine to make that a storyline, and then she was really involved to make sure that they did it appropriately and well.
Definitely.
And I also, another person who I can think of is Sada Ramirez, who had a similar experience in kind of both being able to speak their own truths and then using their power in those rooms to then see that representation on screen. So
We sometimes forget that the longest running queer character in American television history was a bisexual Latinx immigrant, Sada Ramirez.
yeah, that's major.
Should be recognized more often.
And so I'm curious, so for folks, and I'm watching time because I want to make sure we get to audience questions in a bit, but for folks who may not know, who are gay or straight and want to create storylines that are inclusive of bi people and or fans that want to encourage shows to do better, what are some best practices? What are things that you have found either portraying bi characters or helping create bi characters? What are things that people can take away to ensure that we have authentic storytelling?
Well, for me, I think that there's a difference between fidelity orientation and sexuality orientation, and people often conflate bisexuality with polyamory, but not all bi people are polyamorous. Some bi people are monogamous, and that's where that whole idea of like everybody just sleeping with everybody, but that we're capable of being monogamous and we're capable of being poly. So it's like when you're writing, know what you're writing and just don't like put them together automatically. Like know what you're building into the character and why, and like their history and who they are, and so that you're clear about that versus just creating this idea that no bi person can ever be like committed in a committed relationship with whomever.
Yeah, I would also add probably like think about, at least for like people who are writing and making shows, like if I replace this with another race or type of person, would this joke be okay? Because you'll find oftentimes it'll let you know very quickly if you can get away with that if you were saying it about another group of people.
Interesting.
Yeah, and be in conversation with actual bi people.
Right.
You know, have that conversation in the writer's room or talk to your bi friends and make it a part of your life. I mean, I say all the time that I think writing diversity is a pitfall. I think you have to live diversely and then just write authentically.
And
So hire bi writers.
Yeah.
Yeah, one for the feature side, if it's just one person writing, I'm a big supporter of the immersive research thing. Talk to people, have conversations, write everything down. Actually make, if you don't have a diverse enough friend group, that you have someone in it that you can very empathetically and kindly but deeply have conversations with, that's saying something. But also, like, you can go and seek it out. You should. Especially where it's like, I don't think that necessarily everyone will write everything, and certainly every story isn't for everyone, but you can go and find those stories. And I don't know why more people don't do it. It's going to take you a long time to write a script as it is. You have that time.
When you said immersive, I thought you were encouraging people to become bisexual, and I was gonna be like, yes, that is
If
what
you
we're
feel
taking
like
away
it.
from this panel.
No, I meant like, so I wrote,
Method acting.
I wrote a script about the daily lives of dominatrixes, and so I went and spent 2 months in a dominatrix den. It's like, you can go and find the people and say, hey, what can I do that won't disrupt your life, that will allow me to actually authentically witness your life?
YouTube is great for that too. There's no kind of identity or experience that you can't find someone on YouTube vlogging about it, and you get to hear it from like their firsthand experience.
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing is like do your research, especially if you don't have somebody in the room, and call GLAAD, we can help. That's what we do. But yeah, really like do the research, put in the work to make sure that it's going to be as good as it can be, and not just, you kind of coming up with, oh, well, this is what I think a bi person might go through, or what they might say, or how they might talk about their relationships. Like, go talk to somebody, and I guarantee you it will make for a better story.
I want to shout out, because GLAAD's an amazing resource. I also know that SAG-AFTRA has a lot of different resources for both, for bi people who are in those spaces. Dalila, do you want to speak a little bit about that?
Well, SAG-AFTRA has for anybody who's experiencing harassment, anything that is untaught or not great on set, you can call. There's an emergency line. There are people there that's what they're there for, is to help us and to help keep us safe on set. Which I would say that there's a unique set of things around, like GLAAD deals with like our representation out there, and that's whether or not that role is being played by somebody who is queer or not. That's whether the role's being played by straight, whatever. It's what roles you are capable of playing, but that you're safe on set no matter what role you're playing. And I think that there's sometimes that we as bi people face unique challenges. I think like what we were talking about like receiving perhaps extra harassment because somebody thinks that we're more promiscuous or more open or whatever, or hearing homophobic comments and feeling not safe or not okay on set. SAG has resources to help with that you can call and get help.
I'm going to ask a couple more questions, but if there's questions permeating, start thinking of the questions in the audience. I don't know if there's a microphone for audience members, but if not, I can repeat the questions as well. We've talked a lot about representation. Not all representation is good representation. Some of it's bad. Some of it feeds into tropes. Sometimes we're the butt of the jokes. Things that we can do to show good representation. I want to shout out, what are some good, like if you can think of it in the past or current TV, what are your favorite types of bi representation that we're seeing currently?
I think there's a lot of great bi women out there right now. So, like there's Brooklyn Nine-Nine and Stephanie. There's Sarah on Madam Secretary. There's the Bold Type on Freeform. Shout out Bold Type. But there's, Shadowhunters, Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, both of whom I've worked with. But like there's a lot out there. You just have to kind of find it. But I think with all of them, the kind of, common through line is that they're all very like nuanced stories. Like they're not just the bi side character who only like comes in to be like bi in a scene and then just like walks back out. So that's what a lot of my focus is on, is like put us at the center of the story, so you can't just like easily write us off or kill us when you need to cut your budget or need a big shock or anything like that.
Wait, Megan, actually I have a quick question about your reports though. I'm curious as to, because a lot of times bi characters don't necessarily say they're bisexual on screen. I wonder how you count those things, and I'm also then curious as to what people think about the importance of that, if there is one.
Yeah, so as far as how we count things for our reports, we get our information in a few different ways. So it's between watching things and kind of seeing what story is unfolding on screen. Are they, when they're talking about their relationships, are they using different pronouns? Do you see other relationships? Do they just say they're bi? Not many people do. I would like more of that. But we also, work with creators and producers and networks and go to them for, okay, your character may be dating a woman now, but like, what are you thinking for this character's future? And then get that information from them in terms of this is how we're writing it, and this is what we're committed to like coming up, especially for the TV report, because a lot of that is forecasting for stuff that hasn't aired at the time that it comes out. We're kind of getting our information through a lot of different ways. And then what was the second part of your question?
I think you answered it all pretty much, for sure. Yeah. But
Damn,
for
better
the rest
than
of
I
the folks, let's shout out some good representation. What are some of your favorite bisexual representation that's past or current that you're seeing on TV or film?
Schitt's Creek.
Yes, that's my.
yes.
Yes.
I thought that
Yes.
was so well done. I didn't expect it, and then it was just done so well and still so funny. I loved it.
Well, Lost Girl is now done, but Lost Girl is one of my favorite representations of bi.
Can I just say off of that, the woman who did Lost Girl, Emily Andres, she has a show called Winona Earp that also has an amazing bi character on it.
Oh, I haven't seen that one yet, but I love Lost Girl was one of the first times I ever saw them depict a bi character where it wasn't even about whether or not it was a man or a woman. It wasn't about whether I'm not figuring out. She was just like in love with whoever she was in love with, and they treated both love interests equally. And the triangle was the triangle. It was magic, literally magic. Actually, it's about fairies.
I think like in the past too, I would again shout out Sarah as Callie, because she was like a big part of me figuring out I was bi. I was from the Midwest, and there was like no queer people around me, and it was also like in high school, and that was the time that like girl crush was at the height of its thing, and I did not realize that I meant it differently than other people meant it. And then like I was watching Grey's Anatomy, and she was like talking about it, and she's dating Arizona, and she's doing this whole thing, and I was just like, oh shit, like this is a thing. And so yes, Callie on Grey's Anatomy, R.I.P. Gone too soon.
I have to pee. I'll be right back.
Spoiler alert.
She didn't die by R.I.P. I just meant she's not on the show anymore.
Zelda, Trayvon, do you guys have any representation that you appreciated?
I can't.
You can say
I
no.
wish I could think of one. I honestly do. I can't think of a single time I saw a bi man, especially of color, on TV that. If anybody knows one, please shout it out. I don't. I mean, yeah. I mean, the storyline in Insecure was also great. Me and Issa talked about that. It was so. I don't use that example because it's just like it was a small storyline that kind of they just threw away a little bit.
And it was a blip. Like
Yeah,
was
it kind of
like 2
just
seconds and
and then
he
it was gone. And so
And he was dismissed partially because of it, which fed into all the tropes that everybody's like.
Right.
And I'm like, but he's like the sweetest one you've had yet. Like, what are you doing?
yeah, I don't.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, Benoni, who works with Issa, made this podcast about a football player, I believe. I've not actually heard it. He's given it to me. I haven't listened to it yet, but I know what it's about. Is it bi or is it gay?
No, it's a football player. He's black and he's bi.
Oh well, now I gotta go make sure I listen to that. But yeah, I mean, in terms of like TV and film, it's one of the things that's like kind of the saddest part about the bi experience in media is that a lot of times, sometimes like in a negative way, women are fetishized for their sexuality, especially bisexuality. You see it in like music videos and like all like, sorts of bad TV. But men are often always shamed as like, no, you're just gay.
Yeah.
And so those storylines,
Yeah.
or your own, like, you're like, kind of like what happened to him in Insecure. And so it's rare that you actually see that anywhere. So I mean, I feel like we're like so far behind in terms of getting us even to where the amount of representation by women have on TV can like be a part of the conversation. The fact that I can't name anything is.
And I like Willow on Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I would have identified her as bi, but like everybody talks about it like she's just a lesbian because she got into a relationship with a woman, but it didn't necessarily like she had genuine in love relationships with men too over the course of the show, and it's like they erased them because she had this other relationship. It's like, but that's not how it works.
Right.
She actually has a line where she says, "Bye now."
Does it?
Oh.
I'm on episode like 3. Has it happened?
Well, but wait.
Did I
I
miss
don't know
it?
if he's what is on, but I don't know. I wouldn't have necessarily said that there's. I would
haven't
say
gotten there yet.
there is somebody who is bisexual, who is a person of color, but I wouldn't have the black guy seemed to me like he might have been gay. You don't know.
Okay, I'm gonna catch up and then
Yeah.
we'll talk about it.
Well, I'm excited that we can say that him or hers was one of the best representations in
It is.
Sophia. I can't wait.
It is the best show ever made about by black men in the history of television.
So thank you everyone so much for being on this panel. That could obviously go on for so much longer.